There we
Okay.
go. Awesome. Okay. Well, Terah, thank you so much for joining us. We
Thank
just
you.
really appreciate you being here with us, and congratulations on your debut. This is awesome.
Oh, oh my goodness. Thank you so much. It has been an amazing journey. And I just thank you guys so much for inviting me and having me here today. Or tonight, I should say. It's getting dark here.
Yeah. Yes. Well, your story is very thought-provoking. It just begs to be discussed. There's just so many aspects. I feel like we could have just kept like untangling all these little nuanced pieces of the story. And so I think that it makes for a perfect book club discussion. And Target agrees because you were in
Yes.
the Target book club.
That
That's
must be really
Let
cool.
me just tell you, that was a complete shock. I
was
mean,
it.
you yeah, you sit down and you write books and you hope that you get a call like that. You hope that, Celebrity Book Club or someone would, call you and say, "Hey, we want your book to be featured." But I never thought. I mean, I just did not think that it was possible. And when I got the call in January. So the book came
Oh,
out in July. So
yeah.
I've known since January. And I'm like, you expect me to keep a secret for that long? Do you know me? Do you know who I am? Like as my husband says, I can't hold water. And I'm like, you really want me to hold that for 7 months? So it was challenging. It was challenging.
Oh, I'm sure. But then just to have that be out in the world and like to be able to celebrate that finally, I'm sure felt
Yes.
so good.
Yes, it was so good to finally tell people. I got permission to tell certain people, like, I'm the deputy director at my library, so I had to tell my boss, "Hey, I'm going to be gone quite a bit this summer, so and here's why." And so I had to I got permission to tell certain people, so it made it a little bit easier for me to keep that secret.
Wow.
Mhm. I can see that.
Well, and even before you start, can you just tell us just, because we have all these questions for you and we've been chatting and there's so much to talk about, which is, I think, what you intended with this book, to
Yes.
make people question and wonder and to have all these thoughts. But you just mentioned your librarian position, and I've been dying to be like, well, what do you mean? What do you do? What's your
Mhm.
other job that you do with the library? Can you fill us in on that just before we talk about, where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the deputy director of my library system, which my library system consists of 3 libraries and a bookmobile. So I'm basically the number 2 at my job. So I serve in position and in support of my director, but I also manage all the other managers. So all the branch managers of all different branches we have. And then I run a department, and my department is collection development. So that means that I get to buy books. I
Yeah.
get to buy all the adult print and digital books for all of my libraries. And so that's pretty awesome. So that's what I really love to do. That's what I spend quite a bit of my day doing, researching and looking and seeing what new books is coming out, what authors, have what's in the workings for that, and what my patrons like to read, what they don't like to read. I manage our Overdrive Libby consortium. So we have our own little group with a couple libraries. So I manage that. And today, as a matter of fact, today's Tuesday. So, new books on Tuesday. So it was a matter of, okay, what are we buying for the consortium? What's really popular? What's holds, what's on hold and all that. So yeah, that's what I did today. That was all Tuesdays. That's what I'm doing on Tuesday. I'm buying ebooks for our Overdrive consortium. So yeah,
Oh,
I love what I do.
Melody said it in the chat. It's a dream job. That's
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
great.
I get to spend other people's money on books. Like, right. I get to spend not my money on books. And it's amazing. It's amazing.
Oh, very dreamy. I love
Yeah.
that.
I hope
Yeah.
you bought so many copies of your book for your local library.
It was so weird to buy my own book. We have a section called Lucky Day, and Lucky Day is like we buy multiple copies, like anything that's really popular, we buy multiple copies, and you can't put a hold on it and you can't renew it because people want it. And I got a chance to buy my book and buy it for Lucky Day because several book clubs where I live were reading it. So I had to do it for Lucky Day. And that felt so weird to buy my book. And then when it came in and unpackaged it, it was like, this is my book. It was nice.
That is so cool. I feel like we
Yeah.
have chatted with a lot of authors before, but never one that does what you do. So that's really cool to be kind of on both sides of it.
Yeah, it was really unique. We have a Friends of the Library who invites these authors in for this lunch and learn. And I've been participating in these since I've been working at library, but I was the guest speaker at our lunch and learn. And that was really strange too. Like, really? Like, I'm gonna be here talking about the book. It's been such a surreal experience.
That's amazing.
So many reasons. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Ivana. Were you going to say
No,
something?
there's so many. I can see how you've been planning these things and you've been organizing them, and now you're the person.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been really nice.
Yeah. So before we get into more questions about the book too, I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about how you made the jump from being a librarian? And I saw that you were a freelance author, and then you also have traveled to 40 different countries. So you've
Yeah.
been busy. How did you
Yeah.
make the jump from that lifestyle into writing novels? I know that you didn't just stop everything and work on this book. You really had to,
Mhm.
work overtime. But will you talk to
Yeah.
us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I've been freelance writing pretty much since college. And it's always been in the back of my mind that I wanted to try to write a book, but I was so afraid. I ran from it for so long. I mean, when you think about writing a 300, some 100-page novel, you think, oh my God, how do I start? What do I do? And so I ran from it for a really long time until I finally just said, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write a book. And the book that I wrote was my practice book. That's what I call it, because it has not and never will see the light of day. Got really close to getting an agent, got really close, but it wasn't quite there. And so I got a little discouraged and I kind of stepped away for a minute. And I said, if I'm ever going to write another book, it has to be the right idea, the right inspiration. And so I just took my time and I learned more about writing and publishing in the industry. And so I don't regret writing that first book. It taught me a lot about myself. It taught me that hey, guess what, Terah? You actually have the discipline to write a book. And so a lot of people, they get upset about those first books that don't quite make it. And I think, I love that first book. It taught me a lot about publishing. It taught me, like, if you want this, you're going to have to keep fighting for it because it is hard out here. And to learn more about publishing and what's popular, what's not, different styles. So after that first book idea didn't work out, I just said, you know what, I'm going to take my time and the right inspiration is going to come. The right story idea is going to come. And it did. And that's One Summer in Savannah.
Yeah, I love that perseverance that you have. It's paid
Yeah.
off.
Yeah.
So Trudy's going to start us off. We'll have Ivana and I just be kind of throwing out some questions, and then we'll have some questions come up in the chat that we can read, and then other people might want to just chat with you themselves and ask a question too. So we'll help you out. But Trudy is wondering, where did you get the idea for the novel, and how long did you work on it?
Okay, so the second part of that question is easier to answer. The first part is long. I started it took me about 10, 11 months. I started in February of 2020. I know I was in Paris. I remember when I wrote the first line, I was in Paris, France on a girls' trip and said, okay, I had already did all the research, had the inspiration, had everything, and just still was not ready to write. It was such an overwhelming, heavy topic, and I just didn't know how to start. And I just said, I'm going to start. And I remember being in a hotel room and everyone was asleep and I was writing. And so I started in February 2020 and I finished it in November of 2020. And that was during COVID. And so my library closed for 2.5 months. So I got a chance to work from home, which gave me a lot more time to like really lock in and write. So it took me about most of 2020 to write it. The inspiration, there are two pieces of real life events that kind of spawned and started the inspiration for One Summer in Savannah. And I talk a little bit about it in the back of the book about the South Carolina church shooting. When, just days after that event, the family members and survivors, they forgave that shooter. And I realized in that moment that I didn't know anything about forgiveness. I was raised in a church. Forgiveness was always supposed to be on the table, something you ever considered, but I never defined forgiveness for myself. And when they forgave him, because I assumed that there were things that, it was okay if you just did not forgive those things. But they taught me opposite. They taught me that that you can forgive anything. And I don't think I realized that. So I knew then that I wanted to write a book that really challenged readers' definition of forgiveness the way my definition was challenged. And so I had a theme, but I didn't have a story. And I wasn't rushing to write it because, again, I said I wanted to be right. I wanted everything to kind of come organically and not me push it. And so until one day, someone very close to me, a really close friend of mine, shared something with me that, I never knew. that she had conceived a child from a sexual assault. And she said these words. She said, "And I practice the act of forgiveness every day." And I said, oh my goodness, there it is. There's my theme, tied to a story. And I immediately went to research this topic because I was very just shocked that I had never considered, that this could happen after sexual assault, and then I learned that conception after sexual assault is rarely covered in fiction. I am a collection development librarian. I'm around books all the time. And most of the time, if you mention a book, I could probably tell you some comps or something very close to it. It took me a while to try to find something that was similar to this. And I thought, why are we not talking about this? Like, why is this? Where's the awareness on this topic? And then I started doing more research, and I was talking to like this counselor who counsels women who, have been sexually assaulted. And I remember asking her about the conception after an assault. And I said, is there a number for these women? And she said, oh, Terah, she said, if you find any number, double it, maybe even triple it. She said, because they're so vastly unreported. And when she said that to me, I realized, okay, I want to bring awareness to this. And so I went to my friend and we were talking, and I asked her if I could share her story. And she was like, I thought you would, I thought you would. And so I kind of worked with her and got some of experiences from her. And a lot of the things that Sarah went through in the book was directly taken from my friend, who was my inspiration for this book.
Wow. I'm sure that was just really moving for you to be able to chat with her about this really defining experience. And I'm glad that she was willing to let you fictionalize that. And I think that adds a lot of authenticity to the story.
Yeah, she really wanted this story out because she, again, felt like there are millions, and I say there are a lot of Sarahs of the world, and they're out there, and it's not something that I know I've ever allowed myself to think about. And so if anything, this book, it brings awareness to that there are Sarahs of the world, and that this is something that happens, that conception after sexual assault is an even darker side of sexual assault, that it's just not, something that's widely known or something that people talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Touching more on the research aspect, I know that Kirsten, I think she's on, but her mic's off. Just jump in if you want to ask your question, but Kirsten, but I'll ask it for you if you're not free. She had submitted this to me a couple days ago, and I love her question. She said, throughout the novel, the emotional intelligence by both Sarah and Jacob was well beyond what I have witnessed with a lot of people. What type of research did you do? Help did you receive, or background do you have in order to write such care around such a sensitive topic? So you kind of answered that perfectly. Was there any other aspects to your research that you had to pursue?
Yeah, one of it's mostly around Sarah's story and her hesitation about returning home, which the same hesitation that my friend had, was there's no federal law. And it's briefly mentioned in the book about there's no federal law that restricts and takes away the parental rights from a man who conceived a child through sexual assault. And so that means it's left up to the states. And, we have 50 different states. So we have 50 different laws for this. And some states in my research barely even had laws on the books for this thing. And there are women out there right now that are fighting for custody of their child from that was conceived through a sexual assault. And that's something that I needed to research and be able to accurately be able to say and help the reader understand what her hesitation was of moving away and staying away and being back at home. And Maine is one of those real life states that really have, really strong laws on the books when it comes to stuff like this. So that's why Sarah lived in Maine.
We were talking about that a little bit in our book club chat, and that was news to at least me. I won't speak for everybody, but I think a lot of people were really surprised by that, like completely baffled that this was the case. And yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that and kind of spelled that out for us in the book, because that was new information to me.
Yeah. And even what happened in the case of like the Brock Turner case, she didn't conceive a child after sexual assault, but it was left up to that judge. And that judge was like, no, he's a good kid. And it was left up to discretion. And that's the problem with having these different laws, is that it's really left up sometimes to the judge to decide. And, if you come from an affluent family like the Weilers were, like the Brock Turners of the world were, it's easy to influence and not to have to face the consequences for something like this.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
That was interesting. I think me too. I didn't know that. I'm in Illinois, Chicago, Illinois, and I was like, think I have to look this up because I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And we had questions for every character here, so if we can just kind of go down the list here. Like we
I
really
love him.
to talk about your choice. You do mention it in your author's note a little bit about the choice for the identical twins, because before you hopped on here, we were chatting, and that brought up a whole lot of discussion.
Yeah.
Like how and why identical, and yeah, maybe we could start there with Daniel and Jacob.
Yeah, this is the most this and why Hosea speaks in poetry are the two most popular questions that I get, and I love answering them. So Daniel and Jacob are identical twins because it's more a symbolic reason. One of the things that my friend really told me was, she said, I have to face my past. And she kept saying that. And I thought, how can that be reflected in the book? And not through Alana, because Alana doesn't look like the person that you think she did in the beginning. You think she looks like, Daniel, but she looks like Naomi. And so it's like, my friend kept saying, I have to face my past. It's right in front of me. It's right in front of me. And I kept thinking, like, how could I symbolize that? Like, I love that. And I wanted to be able, the reader, to understand that. And so I thought, why not make Jacob an identical twin, a twin? And she had to literally face her past. And the reason why I stayed, and then I kept changing my mind on that, because I thought, no, it's just not, no. So I went back and forth between making them identical and fraternal. But then, Jacob's story kind of took a whole life of its own. When I first started writing the book, it was only supposed to be a Sarah single POV. It was not, you were not going to have a Jacob POV. And, my husband says, stop saying this, but I hear voices when I write. I don't see scenes when I write. I hear voices. And the character of Jacob was just speaking to me. And I thought, I can't use any of this, Jacob, because it was all like stuff that he was telling me that it would be great in a POV, but he wasn't going to have his own. And then I hit the wall, like somewhere in the middle of Sarah's story. And I felt like something was missing. And then I realized, oh, Jacob, you're missing. You've been telling me, hey, I have a place, I have a story to tell. And then when I sat down, I thought about it. I thought Jacob has his own forgiveness to seek. He has his own story. And so I thought, and his story, in my research and trying to figure out and flesh out his story, was he didn't want to be like his brother. He's not his brother. And he said that multiple times. I'm not my brother. I'm not my brother. And so I thought, okay, I'm gonna go in with the identical twin thing, because he is not his brother. They may look alike, but he is not his brother. And so Jacob being an identical twin is more of a symbolic thing, that something my friend was telling me about, having to literally face her past in front of her, because the family of her attacker is a very distinct looking family, which is why Jacob, and they have the green eyes and they have this hair and they have the skin tone, because everybody has a family that you see and oh, that they're all part of that family over there, because they all look alike. And so that was her thing, was having to face her past. So I just thought that would be a great symbolic way of her moving on with her past right in front of her, especially after she had ran from it for so long. And so that's what the decision was, to make Jacob an identical twin. That was a long answer. I'm so sorry.
I love that. I feel like that is such an interesting decision, and it warrants like a long answer. And that was something that we had really talked a lot about. So I think we're grateful for that info. Yeah. I love this question that Jory has in the chat. She wrote, when Jacob changed his name from David, was there a biblical association? Jacob was twin to Esau in the Bible.
Yeah, exactly. So I was able to really go in with that a little bit by doing that. And, his real name was David Jacob, and it was Daniel Joseph. And so he went by Jacob. But, Jacob and David have these significant meanings and personalities and placement in the Bible. And so, yeah, that is exactly that. That's a really good question and very good observation. Oh, I love astute readers. I love astute readers so much. But they get it. I love when people read the book and just think about something for a minute. Because I tell people, everything in my books anyway is intentional. Like, I do everything on purpose. And so I like when people take a minute to think about, why would she do that? So I love that question. Thank you.
Yeah, Jacob wrestles with a lot in the Bible too. And that's, very
evident. Yeah.
Okay, so that was one of our main points of discussion in our chat. The other main point of discussion was the poetry,
The
and that
poetry.
creative decision. Will you talk more about that, how that
Yes.
came to weave that into the book?
Mm-hmm. So Hosea is loosely based on my grandfather, which I kind of sort of touch on a little bit in the back of the book, but I don't go into a lot of detail. He is loosely based on my grandfather. When I was 12 years old, my grandfather suffered a stroke and he lost his ability to speak. So for the rest of his life, we had to decipher what he was trying to tell us through his movements and sounds that he made. And I thought, okay, I'd want to honor my grandfather, but how could I do that? Because I need Sarah's father to speak words. Like I need him to say stuff. And so I thought a lot about that. And then considering the fact that I have such a love of poetry. I have several English degrees. And so poetry has always been like beat into me. But, before I started writing, I started doing poetry, writing poetry. And so I thought, how could I incorporate my love of poetry and this into the same time? And then I thought about it and I said, poems, when you read poetry, it takes you a while to decipher the meaning. Like rarely, a lot of time, do you read a poem and you know exactly what the intent, the meaning is. And so just like we had to do for my grandfather for the rest of his life is decipher what he was saying. I wanted that to be reflected so I used poetry. And so it was definitely a creative decision. I did not know if it was going to hold up. I will be honest. When I got my book deal and I sent it to my editor and I said to my husband, they're going to make me change this poetry. They're going to make me change it. And I thought, if they change it, then I'll maybe cut back. I'll still have him talk in snippets of poetry. I don't know if anybody's read a book called The Weird Sisters by Jennifer Brown, I think. She had her main character, her father spoken a lot of Shakespeare. And so that's one of the last times that I had seen it done as well as it was done. And so I thought, I'll just cut it back and be like that father. And he'll just say certain things in snippets, but not the whole poetry. And my editor did not bat an eye. She did not mind. She didn't say anything. I thought, okay, well, I guess we're doing this. And so we went with that. And the poems, people always ask me, how did you do the research for the poems? And so, well, one, all the poems that we used were in the public domain. So because I'm a debut author and poetry not in the domain is very expensive to use. So we used what was free, except for there are two poems. There's a E.E. Cummings poem that I paid a small licensing fee for, and there is a Robinson Jeffers poem, The Tides Are in Our Veins, We Still Mirror the Stars. That little snippet of that poem is not in the public domain, but his estate was so gracious and allowed me to use it for free. So I always thank them for that. But the rest of the poems, I just use my favorites. I love Whitman. I love Yeats. I love Paul Laurence Dunbar. Those are the three that I use the most because those are the ones that I know, pretty much off the top of my head. So just like people say, well, how do you do that? Well, we memorize, song lyrics, so poems and song lyrics, it's almost the same thing. So it wasn't really a stretch for me to be able to use the poems.
That's so interesting. I'm a speech therapist and I work inpatient in a hospital. And years ago, I worked in the adult hospital. I saw so many people immediately post stroke. And so at first I was like, this is not aphasia. But then I was like, okay, this is great. I love this. Like, we're just going to go with it. And wouldn't it be cool if like our brains are so unique and so like, who's to say that like it couldn't happen? And so I've never seen that done before. And it was so unique.
So I've had people reach out to me and ask me, was Hosea on the spectrum? And that's how they interpret it. And, once you write a book and you give it to the readers, people are allowed to interpret however they want to. And that's how they chose to interpret it, was that he was undiagnosed and he was on the spectrum and he just decided to speak this way. And I thought, okay. And I even had a woman reach out to me and tell me that not that her father started speaking in poetry, but he just changed his speech, like just one day, just completely changed his speech. And they had to basically just learn how to talk to him and communicate with him all over again. And I thought, okay, wow, that I did not know that existed, but it resonated with some people. So I thought, hey, that's a great little added bonus.
Yeah, that's so cool. Morgan has a great question too. How did you decide to make Daniel not just wealthy, but also a genius?
Okay, so the Weilers are not geniuses. I think people think that they're a family of geniuses. They were just very smart. They were just really smart. Alana was the only like true genius. But I needed, the reason why they became really smart is because I needed Sarah to have another reason to have to stay home. And it was that because she just could not continue to keep, Alana locked at the end of the world away. She was smart and she needed to be out amongst people and learning and getting different types of tutors. So I needed another reason. I was like, what could be a good reason to make her stay? Because, make her stay and not just go back to where she was and continue to hide. And so when I made the decision to make, hey, she's really smart and she's really a genius, she couldn't just keep her locked up here. And so because I made her smart, then I had to make all the Weilers, make them really smart. And so that's how they kind of just lend itself to each other.
Yeah, you incorporate like some not heavy science, but maybe to me, some science aspects in there. Was there research that went into like kind of these equations and things like that, or did that come natural to you?
The astronomy comes from my friend Richard Danley, who vetted, and we went round and round on a lot of the astronomy stuff. He helped me with that. And so I thought, okay, great. Cause I'm like, where can I, what I wanted them all to have different loves of different sciences. And so I've known Richard forever. We work together and he loves astronomy. So I was like, okay, Jacob's going to be astronomy and I'm just going to vet all this stuff through Richard. So I had an in-house, astronomist like right there to help me with that. And then, he is of course very smart and knows a lot of science. And he was like, do you know that there's these equations, that people haven't solved? And I was like, really? Okay, tell me about them. And so my ears are always open for stuff. So when he started telling me stuff like that, I started doing some research and I thought, okay, so we can incorporate that. So Alana could be a math genius. And so I was like, what's left? What could Daniel be? And so I thought, why not like biology? So that's where the different sciences came from.
Mm-hmm. So kind of along those lines too, we were talking about how you incorporated a terminal cancer diagnosis into the plot line, which really kind of upped the ante for this family and like the stakes for forgiveness and kind of really dialed things up a notch because that circumstance really changes things. What was your thought process behind that?
I wanted to be some parallels and there's a lot of parallels in this story. I wanted the Jacob and Sarah's story to have very much a parallel from the beginning all the way to the end. They both had someone that they cared about that was sick. I wanted this parallel kind of going there, but I also needed and wanted like a ticking clock. If there's any mystery or thriller writers here, there's always that ticking clock, a ticking clock of there's a bomb in a building and you have to get there before the bomb goes off. So I needed something to kind of pull people through that, it was this thing that you're waiting for, but you don't know it's going to happen. And so I thought, at first, I did not know that Hosea was going to have this terminal illness, but I did always know that Daniel was. And so I thought I wanted Sarah to have to make that decision in that moment in this book, that whether or not she was going to, allow him to have or to meet, Alana. And so I wanted it to be like this ticking clock that if she didn't do this, that she was going to die and she was never going to get the opportunity to have her closure, or Alana was never going to get a chance to meet her father. And so I thought, okay, so I always knew that Daniel was going to be sick, but I didn't know about the Hosea part. I wanted that to also be that parallel. So because they're very much alike in a lot of ways. And that's one of the reasons why they were drawn together, is because they both could relate to each other. They both healed each other. And so I thought, why not that? But in researching and fleshing out Jacob's character, it was the whole grief thing that kind of that started this whole thing, was that they never learned how to grieve. And I thought, what would be a beautiful way for Jacob to now learn how to grieve someone? And how about Hosea being sick? And how about them watching Hosea live? And so, and at the end, he said, I'm watching him live, because he had learned and watched them and how they reacted to Hosea passing away. And that's kind of how he learned his grief. And so that's where I had the decision to make Hosea terminally ill as well.
And that too, I was going to ask about, sorry, the letter from Hosea to his daughter before he dies was, a little bit left to interpretation. I mean, if you're good at inferencing and, again, I always say I teach middle school English. And so we talk about inferring when you read. I'm guessing, right, he's giving her, it said closure, right? Like
Right.
he gave her a letter that said, in fact, is it just saying you should introduce your daughter to Daniel? Is that what
Yeah.
you were
Yeah.
supposed to? Okay.
Yeah. So I had a woman, I was at an event at the Atlanta History Center, and she came up to me and she was wagging her finger. She was like, I am so mad at you. And I was like, oh, it's because Jacob is a twin. Like I thought that was going to be the issue. And she was like, why didn't you include the letter? Like she was so upset about the letter. And I just didn't think that it was, honestly, I thought, okay, I'm going to write a letter and I'm going to include the letter. And then I thought, no, this is not in keeping with Hosea's character. Like I try to be as true to who people are and not make people have these big, miraculous changes at the end. Like Birdie was Birdie all the way to the end, like to the end. Like, I mean, literally to the end. There was not this big change that happened. She had a breakdown. She saw Naomi, like she saw her daughter through Alana. But she, all the way to the end, she was the same. Same with Daniel. Daniel was he antagonized Jacob like the whole way. He was very in keeping with who he is. And so I thought, if I include this letter, that's not really being in keeping with who Hosea was. And I thought it wouldn't be fair to his character. And so then I made the decision not to do the letter. Then I thought, no, I need to include the letter. But then I went back and I kept reading that section. And that section, when she read that letter, was the next chapter is when Daniel was going to finally tell Birdie. And I thought, we got to get there. Like, I don't want to slow the story down at this moment, at this point. We got to get there. And so that kind of helped me make the decision not to include the letter.
But if we did see the letter, it would be, was it in poetry or not? Right? It was not.
It was not. I always figured that it would be a letter, like in regular words, in his regular speech.
That he with Jacob to it just shows again how Jacob and Sarah have this connection and he's connected to her father. And I thought that was so beautiful that it was sort of left to interpretation a little bit, but
yeah.
I read it like 3 times. I was like, I'm missing something. I need to find something. And I was like, well, no, I'm okay with figuring this out because I think I figured it out.
And it was very much like the poetry. I wanted the readers to interpret and to think about what they thought the letter would include. And so that's another reason why I didn't include it, because I feel like obviously there are some beautiful, fantastic questions being asked here. And so the readers are very astute. They pick things up, they know. And so by then had hoped that the readers had an idea of who Hosea's character was and who he was and what would have been in the letter.
Right. That was awesome. That was great.
But just know that people are not happy with me that I didn't include it.
It would have been neat, but it's better left to your own interpretations. I mean,
yeah.
Birdie though too. It's like lots of comments about Birdie and who she was as a character, and how did you build her? Just because she also paralleled Sarah somewhat, I felt like.
Yes.
The loving mother and like you'll do anything for your children kind of.
Yeah. I love you guys. You guys are so great. These are great questions. That's great observation. There is very much a parallel between Birdie and Sarah. And I just wanted people to understand that, to see that. And Sarah says in the last chapter, we're not that different, just 2 mothers that would do anything to protect their children. And when you think about it, you're like, oh, well, yeah, that is true. And so Birdie's character, every story has to have a villain. And, Birdie and Daniel were the villains of this story. And that's what I needed. I needed a villain, but I did not want them to be these redeemable characters. I didn't want people to think that they were just going to be these great people at the end. Like, I wanted them to be very true to real life and how mean and cruel people can be in real life. And so I made her as mean as I possibly could. I mean, I really did. And that was the whole point of that story, because I knew that I wanted the end to be the way it was. And let me let you guys in on a little secret. The last chapter is probably one of the first things that I wrote. When I write my books, I have to know how it ends in order for me to start. And I just write to the end. And so I knew that scene was going to happen. But I wanted the reader to think that Birdie was just going to be this mean, evil person to the end, because I wanted her to have this reaction. I wanted her to finally have this little bit of a breakdown. And so I needed to make her as mean as possible. And when she slapped Jacob at the gravesite, like I didn't have that in there originally. And I thought, what can I do to make her meaner? I said, okay, she'll slap him. Like I literally added that in there just to make her so cruel, and her say things like, get a new house, because no woman's will ever want to live out here. Like I wanted her to say and do these things because everybody has to have a villain, and she has to stay true to who she was all the way till the end. And so, yeah, Birdie was one of my favorite characters to write because I got a chance to be as mean as possible.
Because she was so mean, that last scene was just everything. And just that it happened also kind of like by surprise to her.
Yeah.
I was blubbering in bed and my husband was like, you okay over there?
Yeah.
Her crack and cry and show her emotion. I mean, and then the whole Naomi piece, and oh man.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So as far as other plot points that you had kind of gone back and forth on, how did your book evolve from the initial draft of things to the end of the story? Like you knew how things were gonna end. Were there any versions of the story where like Daniel lived at all, or like any sort of like different plot points that you tweaked along the way?
I'm a pantser. So I have the end of my book, and then I kind of get the beginning, and then I write like a puzzle. I write this scene and this scene and this scene and this scene, and I kind of like connect the dots. Mm-hmm. So there was nothing that really changed. I always knew that Daniel was gonna, how his end was gonna be. Hosea's kind of changed and tweaked a little bit. The, certain things kind of tweaked a little bit, but I didn't change anything. But I will share, since everybody here has read the book, which makes me so happy because now I can like talk and not have to do spoilers. There was not original a scene between Sarah and Jacob. I went back and forth on whether or not how far to take that particular scene. And when I wrote it and it turned in the book, it was just going to be like this kiss. And that was just pretty much going to be it. And I was going to kind of just leave it to the reader to say what their relationship was going to be like. And my editor, she read it and she says, Terah, you slow burn this throughout this whole book. Like, she was like, what do you think do you think the reader would feel cheated or left out if you did not include something more? And I was like, no. This is good. Just a nice kiss and something to say that they did have had developed these feelings for each other. And that was it. That was enough for me. She says, okay. And so we turned it in. I do my development edits. I do my copy edits. And so now she's like, Terah, this is your last chance to make any changes to the book. Just want to go back to this to make sure you're okay. And I thought, yeah, like I'm good. I think I'm good. And then it planted a seed in my head. And I said, this is the second time she's asked me about this. Like, maybe I should consider it. Because before I didn't even consider it. And I said, okay, tell me why. And not because she felt like the reader was going to be like left out. Like, tell me why. And she said, do you think it would be maybe healthy for readers to see that Sarah can have a healthy sexual relationship? And I thought, oh my God, yes. I said, yes. So then before I did it, I went to my friend because I want to stay true to this. And I asked her about it. She was like, yes, that's like one of the biggest issues that sexual assault survivors have is, being able to have a healthy sexual relationship. And she was like, yes, if you don't include it, please do it. And I thought, okay, okay. So I got her permission. She was okay with it. She felt like that needed to be. She was like, there wasn't one. Like she was shocked that there wasn't one. And I was like, no, like I want to be very sensitive to this topic. Like I just didn't want to throw scenes in there just for the sake of having them in there. And she was like, yes, include it. And I thought, what do I want to say with this scene? And I thought, okay, this needs to be all about Sarah's pleasure and not Jacob's. And I thought, okay. And what I wrote is what came out and what has stayed in the book. So that's the only thing that changed from the time that I wrote it to the right before we were about to print the arcs for the book.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that you got your friend's perspective on that too, because like you were saying, like you don't want to speak for victims or, you know, it
Right.
is a touchy subject and you want to bring awareness and get people talking, but you want to do it in a sensitive way.
That's right.
So I'm glad that you were able to get your friend's input on that. And I'm sure you were
Yeah.
so thankful to have her perspective too, because that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. Like you're saying, you don't just want to do it for the reader for this like payoff, but what
Yeah.
you know, the feedback you were getting, like it had some legitimacy to it.
That's right. That's right. So that's the only thing that really changed. And I love the way it turned out. I really liked the way it turned out. And then it offered me, Jacob, an opportunity to say things. He said in the chapter after that, he said, I countered every move that she made first, letting, you know, the reader know that he wasn't going to push her. He wasn't going to force her into anything, that it was all about her and her decision. And so I that gave me an opportunity to kind of expand on that and having consent, you know, having that whole consent. So yeah, I love that we added that. And I'm glad my editor kind of just kept asking me about it and asking me about it, and that we did include it into the book.
Yeah, Rebecca said in the chat it was tastefully done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Jory in the chat is saying Savannah is my happy place, but it does have crime. Please talk about the vandalism of the bookstore and other shops. The vandalism happened the night of Sarah and Jacob's evening together.
Yeah, that wasn't like somebody else had asked me about that. And it was just something, a catalyst to get Jacob there. You know, at that point in the book, Jacob had been gone. He had those issues with, you know, Birdie. This was right after the scene at the cemetery where she slapped him. So he was just kind of starting to crack at this point. And so I thought, how could I get him back there? What would be a good reason for him to come back? And so I thought, why not have some kids do something wacky, like break all the windows out of this place? And so it wasn't like tied to any real life true things, but it was just like an idea of something that was major that would make him want to come back and kind of be with her during that time.
Jacob is such a great guy. Like a lot of ladies would like to know Jacob.
I love Jacob. I'm writing my third book now. And Jacob is still he is still like by far one of the favorite characters I've written. I thought for sure, oh, Jacob, you're going to go away. No, he is still one of my favorite characters, just because I put him in such an impossible situation. You know, he came home like Sarah to kind of understand his family and kind of put his family back together and kind of rebuild that. And then he accidentally meets this little girl that looks just like his sister, and then discovers Sarah's back home. And then she asked him to, hey, keep this secret from me. And so he's trying to get to know his brother and kind of mend his relationship with his mother, but yet still be loyal to Sarah because he was so, upset about how his family treated her. So he was put in such an impossible situation. So he will always forever be a special character to me.
So we usually ask this at the end, but you kind of hinted at it. And Morgan said, wait, what's your second book? So is One Summer in Savannah your second? Do you consider this your second book, even though it's your debut because you wrote your first one?
Okay. I consider this to be my first one. And so
okay.
my second book, yeah. So my second book is a book called Long After We Are Gone. And I'm cemented in Southern fiction with Source Books. They want me, they're like, okay, yeah, you need to do Southern fiction. And it tells the story of 4 siblings who return home after their father dies to save their ancestral land. And it's a family drama. So I like to say, and themselves, because they all have like all these issues. And it's loosely based on all my books, I think, going forward are going to be based on real life events that happen to people and these circumstances that's just not as widely known. And this tells the story of 2 brothers. It's kind of inspired by these 2 brothers who went to jail for 7 years fighting for their ancestral land after it was sold from underneath them. And it really speaks to what's happening in different legal laws, legal loopholes of how people and these corporations and governments are able to take land from people through like tax sales and eminent domain. Eminent domain is something that everybody has heard of before. And so it's kind of based on their story and them coming home to save their land. So yeah, and that's out in May of 2024.
I just saw that. in a source books. I was like researching 2024 releases and I saw that and I was like, oh yay, it's coming. The cover looks great
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
know what? I haven't even done that. Like, Sarah, you gonna do a cover? You gonna do a cover reveal? And I was like, oh yeah, but I'm still so actively, still talking about One Summer's Event. I'm like, I'm not ready to stop talking about this book yet. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'll push out the cover soon. So
You
yeah,
got time. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. What do you envision is next for Sarah, Jacob, and Alana? Because I read in your author's note that you had an epilogue, like you wrote an epilogue, but then I
Yeah.
don't know, what do you think? What do you think is like the final say for them?
Yeah. I had an epilogue, and the epilogue was a letter that Alana wrote to Birdie. And she was just talking about them going back to Maine to kind of like pack up their house where they lived. And that on their way there, Jacob introduced Alana to some of these really smart people. And these smart people were people from MIT who were eventually, in my head, going to become like these tutors that's going to help Alana kind of expand and learn so she can solve the equation. But at the end of that, she says, oh, and Jacob says that the baby is a boy, the baby's a girl. And so I thought that'd have been a nice little cute segue that they would, in my opinion, in my head, it was, I don't believe in like these happily ever after endings. I tell people that I write books with bittersweet endings. In my head, it's not a happy ending immediately, just because they have to deal with the fact that Hosea is going to pass away and Daniel's going to pass away. And so you have that. And then you have to figure out this way of being able to incorporate Birdie into their lives now that she knows about her without Birdie overstepping. And Birdie's going to overstep in my head. She was always still going to be true to herself. And so, but I've always thought that eventually they'll find their footing and get married and have another daughter. And so that's what I always thought in my head.
I love that. Does anyone have questions that they want to ask or throw out in the chat? I got more, but if anybody else wants to
I love
in.
questions.
Okay, if you think of something, throw it in the chat. What do you, Terah, hope that readers take away from this story?
I love this question. That first off, to define forgiveness for themselves. We live in a society to where we're often influenced by other people and the way other people think versus ourselves. When I was telling people what the log line of this book was about, a woman who conceived a child from a sexual assault, and she has to decide whether or not to allow her attacker's family into her daughter's life. People are like, no, like immediately, like they said immediately no. Because that was easy for them to say no, because it seems like it's obvious. But, you put yourself in Sarah's shoes. She's a woman that's tired of running, and she has an 8-year-old daughter that's asking about her father every day. And she knows that eventually she's going to have to tell her the truth. And her daughter's a genius, and she can't keep her at the end of the world forever. And so that changes the circumstances a lot more. You start to think, well, okay, I can understand that to a certain extent. And so, but it's so easy for people to say what they wouldn't do, but they're not in those shoes. And so I always tell people to take a minute to like define forgiveness for yourself and what that means to you. And one of the things that I like to tell people and want people to remember from this is forgiveness does not equal forget. And I think we often think that. I think we often think that just because you forgive someone, that you forget what they did to you. And that's not true. Forgiveness does not, for the other person. Forgiveness is for the person that gives it. And it by no means absolves that other person of any wrongdoing that they did. It's just saying that you're tired of carrying this burden and you want to lay it down. And for my friend, she just said, I feel 1,000 pounds lighter, that I don't have to worry about this anymore, that it's okay, that it's going to be okay. Because in her thinking that, okay, I'm going to keep, and it was the son, she had a son, not a daughter, and keeping her son away, that she thought that she was protecting him, but she realized that she was hindering him and herself. And even Sarah kind of says that in Sarah's story, she says, I didn't love her at first, but protection came first. And I remember talking to my friend and saying, protection is love. You thought that you didn't love, your daughter at first, but your son at first, but you did. Protection is love. Love manifests itself in different types of ways. And I've heard from women who said, thank you for saying that about the first part of the story, the first paragraph about not loving your child, because I think people think, that, every pregnancy is this welcome, great thing. And, children are a blessing. They really are. But people have different circumstances, and pregnancy is not always the easiest thing for people right off the bat. And that sometimes it takes people a minute to grow into that, to accept that, especially in the case of like what happened with Sarah, and especially in any case where women is being abused or the circumstances surrounding that pregnancy is difficult. So it takes time. And so I want people just to take a minute to define forgiveness for themselves, and to know that if you choose to forgive someone, it doesn't mean that, you forgot what they did, but you have to ask yourself, is this hindering you? Is this hurting you? And to be able to move on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that theme came through loud and clear in the book. And that's what I loved most about it, is just these questions that you raised. I know that you set out to raise questions about what acts are forgivable or not forgivable. And you really knocked that out of the park. And I think it does, every reader is going to answer that question differently. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's kind of the beauty of it, is just to make people think and get them talking about that.
Yeah. And I wanted Sarah's journey to forgiveness to be like this breaking down of this wall. Like if you like the first like layer coming down of her wall was her agreeing to come back home. She hadn't been home in forever. So that was the first, layer that came down. And then she allowed Sylvia to take Alana to the museum. That was another layer of her wall coming down. And her allowing Jacob into their lives. That was another layer. And her allowing Marcia to meet Alana. That was a huge layer coming down, because she had been so nervous about anybody, meeting her. And so Sarah had a journey to forgiveness, and like all these breaking downs of this, of her getting there, and like all these layers of her wall coming down. And I wanted that to kind of be an obvious thing to get her to the end, to where she did what she did.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question.
Sure.
Hi. So we had a discussion before you came on about this forgiveness bit. And now knowing that you're a pantser, but you wrote the ending first, if you will, or you knew who was going to be the villain and all of that. We talked about, well, what if he wasn't dying? Where would the forgiveness be? Would everybody forgive? Any thoughts on that?
That's a good question, because in the real life situation, he's still alive. Mm-hmm. And so that is an ongoing thing. So when she said in the beginning, she said, I practice the act of forgiveness every day. That's what I meant in regards to that. He's still alive and well and kicking. And so it doesn't really change anything. I think if I chose not to have, Daniel pass away, that I still think there would have been a moment where she did allow him to meet his daughter. And it was just more like, theatrical to have him dying and be literally on his deathbed. But it didn't change anything in the forgiveness, just because I know in real life that the person is still alive. And so it wouldn't change anything. And that's what I meant by like having this journey for Sarah, to see how she just, her layers and her wall has slowly started to come down.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. That's a good question.
I meant to ask this earlier too. Laura Beth, she is not on right now. She's at her daughter's volleyball game, but she's going to watch the recording. She asked me to pass along this question to you. She is a very like astute reader. Like she picks up on things, and I'm like, I feel like sometimes the author is like, oh, I guess so, but this is so interesting to me. Okay. So Laura said, early on, when Jacob mentions 2 subatomic particles and how they are always connected, were you foreshadowing?
Yes, very much, very much, very much. I love foreshadowing. Just because I thought, yeah, let me just take the reader there and show the reader where I eventually want to end up, that I wanted them to have this connection. And so that's a very good observation. I love foreshadowing very much. Yeah, that's exactly why I did that. And some of Jacob's things, like his explanation of magnets and the I'm in you, being you, quite literally, had to go through a lot of revisions with with Richard, the one that did all the astronomy research, just because I'm like, I need this to be sexy. And he was like, no, it has to be technical. And I'm like, no, I need some. And he was like, no, that's not technical. And I'm like, come on, we got to compromise on some of this stuff. And so so we that was a lot of like back and forth. And he was like, well, Terah, that's not exactly right, because a magnet really does. And I'm like, listen, I know what a magnet really does, but I need it to have like this sexy kind of element to it. And he was like, okay. So that was fun.
I love that. Well, what books have you recently read? You probably get a lot of early arcs from your position at the library. What upcoming books or books have you recently read that you're really excited about? Or have
So I just finished. I am blurbing. I blurbed The Girls We Sent Away by Megan Church. She is a source books writer. So I just read and blurbed that. And I just recently, I'll tell you what I've read. I was curious about Fourth Wing.
Oh,
romanticy is not really my genre. I do read widely, but I'm like, let me just see what is happening with this book. Like, why is this book sold out everywhere? What is the hype? And so I was like, I'm gonna listen to it. I had a bit of a long stretch of a book tour, so I was in a car for like 4 or 5 days, and I was like, I'm just gonna listen to it and see what drug is in this book that people are just going crazy for. And I remember being like 3 hours in, I was like, oh, yep, I get it. Like, I get it. I'm sold. And I thought I would enjoy it, but not love it the way I am. And so I'm like, Iron Flame, come on, let's go. We need the sequel to it.
I love it. I felt the same way. Those are my thoughts exactly.
Really? Okay, good. And I got my mother, my husband, like my whole family, like we all went through the whole Fourth Wing thing. So yeah.
That's awesome. That's great. Well, does anybody else have any last questions before we maybe grab a picture? Oh, wait, Kirsten, she says, I love this symbology of Sarah not entering into Daniel's hospital room, especially on the forgive but not forget.
I love that. I love that so much. Thank you for mentioning that, because I also wanted to show in Sarah's path to forgiveness that she still had a boundary. She still had a line, and her line was right there at the door. And she said, this is the furthest I go, the length of my forgiveness. So this is as far as I'm going. And I wanted to show that you can forgive and still have a boundary and a line there. And that's why she did not go into the room. And thank you so much for mentioning that, because I love when people pick that up, that she did not go into the room, that she did give forgiveness and she was willing to forgive, but she had her boundaries there still too. So thank you for that. That's great.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah. I love that.
Very symbolic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we would love to take a picture with you if that's okay. We always like to snap a photo, and if you have a book, or if
can I hold my book up too?
Yes, please do.
Let me hide the 30% off with
you. So you guys get set up. I'm gonna find my control buttons. And shift. Although, wait, didn't I just see Kirsten? Oh, there you are, Kirsten. I'm taking over your job. A photog here. Okay, I got this. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, cheese. All right.
Perfect.
Yeah. Well, Terah, this has been amazing, and we are so lucky that you gave us your hour of time of your life. We know you're busy, and this is such a big time for you, and we're so happy for you. I mean, a debut novel, and like the way it's just sweeping around everybody and every book club that I know, it's been amazing.
It has been a blessing, and I thank you guys so much. As a debut author, I don't take, anything for granted. And so I just thank you guys so much for taking the time to buy the book, to read the book, to discuss it. I am so grateful for you readers. And as a collection development librarian, I love patrons. I love readers. And so thank you so much for choosing to read my book, because I know how many books are out there and how many options and choices you have. And when I see that people are reading and connecting with this book, it just makes my heart full. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Terah.
Thank you guys so much.
We can't wait to read your next book in May.
Okay, May.
Thank you. Our list already.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.